Palestinians clashed with Israelis.
Is it a lamb?
Palestinians clashed with Israel. Is it a lamb, a calf,
as blood on
or a kid? You bring Friday to the
mosque
mosque as blood offering.
Animals is the word.
What was it again?
Elsewhere, hundreds of suspects.
Mosque, it says.
Though no suspicion
Animals
on the sacrifices themselves.
is the word used here
Could
and
not
elsewhere. Hundreds of suspects.
For these,
Though none,
remain clean.
no one suspicion fell upon, sacrifices themselves could not have without these needed to remain clean. The writer places to the next sacred, it says, what was it again? We offered for the spilling of blood on a Friday. It is a Friday. Someone checks the upper right-hand corner of the desktop just to make sure. Passover.
4:57.
4:57 a.m. That's what it says, and there's certainly no reason to doubt it.
Is this how a story is told?
Is this how a story is told? And is this the tale or the telling? And is this the tale or telling of what makes it inherently example of a more conservative form of poetry? It says hundreds of successes. What was it again? Narratives. A narrative, you say? It says, and all are these fragmented stories of lives, not narrative. It says an end to the violence. Is it a calf, a lamb, or a kid? You bring it. It says on a Friday to the mosque. Though the mosque is not yours, it says. Jerusalem's old city Red Crescent emergency services says tensions, it says, as such.
Is this enough to constitute a narrative?
Is a lamb you bring to the mosque. Though the mosque is not yours, it says. Jerusalem's old city Red Crescent emergency services says tensions, it says, as such. As such is enough to constitute a narrative. Is it enough to constitute a narrative or a merely story, and beneath it what form or structure of fable or myth derived, perhaps, if you take the anthropological sources seriously, from some arcane ritual similar to the one involving the blood of Muslims? What was it again? A lamb, a calf, or a kid, it says, or now perhaps some larger and more sacred prayer, significantly immeasurable, a form of sacrifice, a Palestinian child or a woman's eye, a few hundred men. He did not quite recognize himself as what it was again, the stranger at the door, it says. It says,
at Passover,
a lamb for grace, a calf, or a kid. It says, an eye, a hand, a man, a mosque, a church, a temple, a hill, a holy hill, a holy...
It says, a lamb, a calf, or a kid. It says, an eye, a hand.
So many years ago, he did not quite recognize himself as, what was it again? The stranger at the door, or a child, a narrative, you say, in the mosque, an empty chair at the table, a stranger at the door. It says a man, a lamb for grace, a calf, or a kid. It says an eye, a hand, a man, a mosque, temple, a hill, a holy hill, a mountain, a star, a pool of blood, a story, a lamb, a calf, or a child, a narrative, you say, in the mosque, an empty chair at the table, a stranger at the door. Are the flags more flags, it says, such an adjective placed before them, with the word Hamas placed before them, it says rubber-coated bullets. It says stuff, as they are.
Are they less bullets being rubber than the bullets which would remain
escalation, and the flags more, it says, with the word Hamas placed before them. It says the Israelis, or ministry. It says dozens of masked men. It says murderers. It says Hamas flags. It says the Lamb suffers. It says die more, knowing he has set aside and devoted to God, gather stones by some unqualified judges, by another word placed in front of them, such as steel. It says the Israelis, or it says ministry. It says dozens of masked men, by some adjective, by some designation, word, by the right, by the side, by the day, by the night, by the name, by the week, by the making it so, by the hour, by the minute, as beating with batons is not an aside devoted to God, by some, except by designations, a word.
The narrative, Israel's national story,
and being beaten with batons is not entirely traditional to holiness, though it would be hard to argue that it is anything less than thoroughly tribal. A lamb, a calf, or a kid, an eye, a man, a hand, a woman, a child, a mosque, a church, a temple. It says Israel.
A lamb, a calf,
a hill, a holy mountain, and being beaten with batons is not entirely traditional. Or a kid, an eye, a hand, a man, a woman, a child, a mosque, a church, a temple. It says Israel. A hill, a holy hill, a mountain, a star, a pool of blood, a story gathering from a pool of blood, a story of blood, security officials, it says, officials say, it says, are working to comfort, they say, it says, the story of blood is a story of blood, inherently narrative is a poem of blood, is a state of blood, is a state of a church of blood, is the relation of blood to terror, is the state, the terror, the relation to the blood, the story of blood, inherently narrative is a blood of poetry that's prepared, inherently conservative, the state of blood, inherently from terror. It says a configuration of time. It says that there are terrors within the blood, within the stones, that there are stones within the story. It says a morning, a day of Friday. It says a day of Fridays. It says a day of terrors. It says a day of Friday terrors. It says a temple. It says a church were stones in the telling, a story. And the stones were configured in the telling, in the story, in this way of uprising or of rising up.
Were they narrative stones or the stones of fable and myth?
Were they stones of story or the stones of the telling? It doesn't say. It does say. It says it's hard to say. It says that it's hard to say. 7. It says the 1960s. It says the 1970s. It says today. Also form an obstruction in the throat. It says 1948. It says refugees. It says there were refugees. It says thousands and thousands. It says displaced. It says people. It says individuals without homes. It says individuals without shelter. It says individuals without education. It says individuals without safety. It says individuals who lost their mothers. It says individuals who lost their fathers. It says the losing of fathers. It says the losing of mothers. It says the losing of children. It says where the story becomes difficult to say. It says where the story becomes difficult to tell. It says where the story becomes difficult to narrate, becomes difficult to temple, becomes difficult to mosque, difficult to heal, becomes difficult to mount upon them, to stand, military operations, to rise up, to kneel, to pray, to mourn, to dance, to turn the corner, to turn the phrase, to turn during the clashes with Israeli forces. Here is a man's hand, here is a woman's wrist, here is a child's eye, here is a Palestinian, here is a ring, here is a table setting, here is an empty cup, here is a place where blood was spilled, here is the pouring of water, here is a place without water, here is a place without sound, here is a place of death, here is a temple, here is a church, here is a myth. Here is a mythos, a rite, a folktale, a ritual, an evening, an event, a happening, a day, a morning, a dawn,
a day like Friday,
a hill, a month, a church, a temple, a day like Friday, a day like Good Friday, a day, a Passover to the morning of the status quo, a day in Ramadan. It says religious, it says police were forced to enter the grounds. It says how many other ways of saying it? Friday, a good day like Friday. A good day for Passover, for maintaining the status quo. A day in Ramadan, it says religious, it says church, it says temple, it says mosque, it says how many other ways of saying a thing who forced these police to enter these grounds. A mountain, just a place where the spilling of blood succeeded. What was it again? A lamb, a calf, or a kid, a mosque, a temple, a church, a holy hill, a holy star, a mountain, a pool of blood, a story of blood, a story of bleeding, Palestinians clash in the story of blood, inherently narrative, it says. It's a poem of blood, inherently narrative, an eye, a hand, a man, a woman, a child, a mosque, a church, a temple, a hill, a holy mountain, a star, a holy pool of blood, a holy star guiding him in the form of an holy emptiness and its holy terror. Massive stone thrown against the wall. It says the stones were massive, but the bullets were only rubber. The stones were massive, but the bullets were only rubber. Were only rubber, and hence here quite real bullets, though the stones were most assuredly real as well. being massive. Secret, it says, only stun grenades, and hence not actual bombs, and real stones were thrown, it says. Massive stones were thrown against the walls, against the police, against the temple, but hence not quite real bullets. For the stones were most assuredly real, being massive. Secret, it says, only stun grenades, and hence not actually bombs. Real stones were thrown, it says, but not actually real bombs. Just stun grenades, throwing. Is there a narrative in the way that the story is told? Is the story
a story or a way of telling?
A way of telling?
Or a way of narrating? Is there
a narrative in the way the story is told? Is there a story in the adjectival reality? It says of the stones, the bullets, the grenades. Is there a story or a way of telling? Is it a narrative or a way of narrating? The story is a story that's told in this way. It says, of the stones, the bullets, the grenades. Does narrative belong to the stone or the bullet or the grenade or the ritual? Does it belong to the adjective placed in front of any one of these? Does it belong to the lamb or the silence of the lamb, the calf, the unvoiced protest of the calf? Does it belong to the kid who cannot speak or the witness who says of him, 52 Palestinians were wounded? Does it say it belongs to the holy month of Ramadan? Does it say it belongs to another holy month? To be spoken for is to lead, or to be spoken, it says the mosque, to write victims. It says who speaks for him, 52 Palestinians were wounded. It says, does it belong to the holy month?
Is to choose.
To write victims or offering is to choose, it says, though it says cash rewards were offered. This is certainly not holy in the traditional sense. That would be hard to argue that is anything less than traditionally tribal. Can a tribe exist? It says concerns, it says a small group of Palestinians, though it says cash rewards were offered. In the traditional sense, that would be hard to argue that it is anything less than traditionally tribal. Conflagration, dozens of masked men, it says, because the compound, it says, of Palestinians, a lamb. Can a tribe exist, it said, under these conditions, it said. Are the conditions met, it says, and they gathered stones, conflagrates, dozens of masked men, says, and they gathered stones, and other, it says, concerns, it says, a small group of Palestinians, and they gathered stones, objects in anticipation of violence, of Palestinians, a lamb, because the compound, in anticipation of violence, fireworks, it does not say. And what other objects did they gather? What other objects did they gather? It does not say. What kind of violence did they anticipate? It does not say. Because if we recognize sacrifice as violence, we must ask, what kind of violence did they anticipate? What other objects did they gather? It does not say. What kind of violence did they anticipate? It says authorities sacrifice its violence. We must say anticipate does not say, because if we recognize sacrifice as violence, we must ask, what kind of violence did they anticipate? What kinds of objects if they sacrifice? If we fail to ask, we have overlooked the fact. What kinds of violence? Cash rewards were offered to anyone who succeeded, it says, beaten with batons, and exactly what it was again in carrying a lamb or a calf or a kid to the mosque that was not their mosque, in carrying a calf, a lamb, a child, a kid to the mosque, to the holy hill of the mountain, it says. There was a holy hill, it says. The Holy Spirit says, it says. What exactly is carrying a lamb or a kid or a calf to the mosque? That was not their mosque, the carrying of a lamb or a kid to the mosque, to the hill. Grounds to disperse the blood that had been first spilled to attain these cash rewards. To attain these cash rewards, the blood was spilled. It had to be spilled to attain these cash rewards, because that is part of the fable. It says Palestine, the structure of the folk tale, the structure of the myth, that the information belongs to the ark. What was it again? A calf or a kid? Because once again, the morphology of the folktale made it so and made it so, and the morphology belonged to the even older morphology of the ritual, the sacrifice, the rite of the blood spilling, the proper table of the feast, the information belonging to the sacrifice or fast to the proper God, and the proper, was it a lamb, a calf, kid? Because once again, the morphology of the folktale made it so, the myth my minister, the proper hill, holy mountain, it says, speak to the proper gathering. Was it again so? Party officials, it says, but the morphology, the older morphology of the ritual of sacrifice, the spilling of blood on the proper table of the proper lamb, the proper kid, or the proper calf. Isn't it the same God? The same God, the Christians, the Muslims, the Jews, the Hindus throughout Israel, the Buddhists, though some say Buddhists, for there is no God, though it was so at one point, and some say it says, isn't it the same God, Christians, the Muslims, the Jews, Hindus throughout Israel, though some say no, for the Buddhists, there is no God. But there was once. It says that Hilltop is the most. Some say the bullets were forced to enter, yes, and some say no. Some say yes, and some say no. In order to prevent further violence, some say yes, and some say no. Some say no, some say the spilling of blood is required to bind the community. Some say the spilling of blood is required to bind the community of the tribe to the members of the temple mount has been made to the tribe. Some say no. Some say violence for decades. The symbol of blood is required to bind the community to the tribe to the center of the 2,000 for each of these members of the tribe. And some say no. Some say yes. Narrative of terror, and some say no. No one asked the lamb, the calf, the kid. No one asked the lamb, the calf, or the kid. It says, yes, it says 1866, knowing the lamb, it was the Catholic recognized internationally. Would no one ask the lamb, the calf, the kid, including the West Bank and Gaza, and all agreed that it was a story of Israel also captured. If it is not a story, it is still easy to fit into the morphology of the story, of the folktale, of the myth, arrange the order in which the lamb, calf, or the kid appears in the folktale, the myth, the narrative, and the tale, including the West Bank and Gaza, are all most agreed that it is a story Israel also captured. Tale and the story. Arrange the order in which the stones were gathered and further violence was prevented. It says a monetary reward was offered. It says blood must be spilled. It said the relations between the spilling of the blood and the gentle nature of the rubber bullets. It says the rocks were real. It says the stones were hard. It says they were massive. It says the formulations, the divisions of beginning, the middle, the end, expressions as what was upon a time, and what was once upon a time, the expressions therefore on a Friday, perhaps at the site of the holy hill years ago, a calf
begin the story in this way and use words to
lamb or a kid had been killed. How did it go again? Begin the story in this way and use words to assign specific types of values in order to reduce terror or conflict. Use words such as provocation, unrest, disquiet, removal, deployment, capture, defend, and move. When describing the arrival of the lamb for the kid, remind those listening that such a story belongs to a tradition. It says thousands. In order to reduce terror, use words such as provocation, unrest, disquiet, removal, deployment,
the numerical value,
defend, and move. When describing the arrival of the lamb for the kid, remind those listening that such a story belongs to a tradition significant of those years, and hence the significance of the tradition itself. In order to sacrifice them, de-emphasize, it says, the number of lambs and kids killed, calves killed as acts of terrorism against a people, or the sheer volume of blood spilled on such a holy site.